Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Kerbal with JNSQ. Last episode we made some monumental milestones, landing a Kerbal on Minmus for the first time, as well as jumping straight into a robotic exploration of the Mun. And today we're going to continue with that and see what we can learn about Kerbin's larger and brighter companion. To get started, we're going to launch another one of the Mun Lander probes we fired off last episode. After an ordinary equatorial launch, we conduct a transfer to the Mun for 1,545 meters per second of delta V. After we coast up and enter space around the Mun, we're going to immediately start the site experiment we've included on this craft. Last episode, this slot was taken by the LITE, the LITE, but since that only runs once for low and high space on a particular body, we've already collected all the available Mun science from that experiment. The site can at least grab some biome-specific data while the probe approaches the Mun, and grab some low space data before landing. After capturing around the Mun, our orbit is a bit inclined, but since we're not particularly obsessing over the landing site or returning this craft, it isn't really a concern. This time we kept the transfer stage until the D-orbit burn, when it was discarded, destined to slam into the ground below. In contrast to our last landing, this time some of the probe's delta V was used to take a more conservative landing approach by killing off more of its horizontal velocity earlier in the descent. At 10 kilometers above quote-unquote sea level, we are burning using the SMART ASS to point us 20 degrees upwards from retrograde, which is to say we're spending a little bit more of our thrust on slowing down vertically than we're spending to slow down our overall velocity. After a while of some gentle burning pointing retrograde to kill off our horizontal velocity while the Mun's gravity slowly pulls us down, we set the probe down gently and the experiments immediately get to work. This particular craft landed in the Highlands biome. After waiting a few minutes for the research and site data to transmit, all of the craft science has been handled and we can head back to the KSC. Back home, we have enough science points to unlock advanced electrics, but there's a bit of a lot of a snag in that to be able to research a tech this expensive, we have to pay 902,000 funds. We technically have enough, but I'd like to have a bit of a buffer going before sinking that much money into upgrading the R&D center. With that said, I headed into mission control to see what we can do to get a bit of extra money. Science from space around the Mun won't be completed right away, but will provide 9,000 funds up front. A rescue mission will net about 33,000 funds after the cost of the rocket is accounted for, so it looks like a lucky day for Jofrid Kerman, who is unfortunately stuck up in orbit. After warping to what I thought would be an appropriate launch window, we can go ahead with the launch. I ended up being behind the target, but since the target's in a higher orbit than us, that's totally fine. I think I underestimate the speed of my targets since I'm used to being able to kind of eyeball these launches with the stock solar system, but this system is scaled up, so all the numbers have kind of shifted around. The planning for the rendezvous is the same, and we should be able to get to the target within 4 to 5 orbits using 2 maneuvers. As we close in on our very gentle closest approach at 2.2 meters per second, we need to get ourselves a bit closer to the target. One way to eyeball this is the nav ball. When you burn retrograde, you sort of push the retrograde mark away, since its new direction is the part of your velocity that isn't getting slowed down. Combine that with the fact that if the markers pointing away from your target and pointing away from where you're moving are on top of each other, you must be moving towards your target. And so you can use the nav ball markers to tighten up your approach with the spacecraft engines by pushing the retrograde marker onto the anti-target marker. With that said, we've successfully inched up and parked next to Jofrid's capsule, and they can head over to our ship. We've landed here in a new biome, the arid lowlands, so it's time for Jofrid to hop out to collect an EVA report and a surface sample. After the crew report is completed, we can recover the vessel and our new crew member. It's funny how none of the people stuck in space so far were actually pilots, implying the pilots are smart enough not to get stuck up there. It's quite expensive to hire new Kerbonauts, and I would like to have extra pilots on hand, but oh well. Regardless, with those funds in the bank, I feel comfortable upgrading the research and development complex and finally, after many trials and tribulations, unlocking the advanced electrics tech. This grants us access to bigger batteries, much better solar panels, and some other odds and ends. Over in the VAB, I got straight to work. Since we have the parts now that the Mun SCAN Sat really needed, it would be wise to send off a satellite to collect data from the Mun. Since we've landed in 2 of the larger biomes on the Mun, it would behoove us to have that data available to make sure we can land our 3rd probe in a unique biome, and to make sure we can land a manned mission in a unique biome as well. Unlike Minmus, 105 kilometers above the Mun is considered low space, so no site experiment here, And in fact, there really aren't any experiments to put on here except the scanners themselves. This probe has much beefier batteries and solar panels than the previous SCAN Sat, and the small rocket parts are paying big dividends here too. This satellite has 2200 meters per second of delta V with a mass of 1600 kilograms, in contrast to the Mun SCAN satellite's 2100 meters per second at 2100 kilograms. Once the probe is in space, we can put out our extensible solar panels for the very first time. This vessel generates much more power than the previous satellite and should be able to keep the scanners running properly. When planning the transfer, I got a bit absorbed in what I was doing, and I unfortunately forgot to actually complete the orbital insertion. Happens to the best of us. Luckily, the maneuver started when the probe was at about 78 kilometers, so it didn't go deep enough into the atmosphere to be damaged. Doing the maneuver in the atmosphere did mess with the flight planning, but we can still get the trajectory we want with a course correction maneuver. I'm getting the Mun periapsis down to about 33 kilometers. We want to do the expensive capture burn as close to the Mun as possible, and we can boost the orbit back up to circularize at 105 kilometers for only 26 meters per second of delta V. At this point, I went to enable the scanners, and that was when I noticed what the perceptive among you may already have. So, yeah. This craft has really good performance despite having a whole extra scanner on it that is just dead weight. In any case, it's about time to unload the vessel and let the scanners run, but there's one thing to do first. Kerbalism uses the best solar panel exposure it saw before you unloaded the vessel to determine how much power it should be generating while the vessel is unloaded. We want to make sure all the panels have full sun exposure before we head back to the tracking station, and there's a quick way to do this with MechJeb. In the Smart ASS under the Advanced tab, we can set the vessel up to point directly towards or away from the sun. Either works in this case. With that, there's no fiddling about trying to point it manually. The computer can hold it in the precise exact spot you want, and can, in this case, get the solar panel's average exposure up to 100%. Back in the tracking station, we can set up our view to watch the satellite pass over the Mun and time warp to work on our contracts. We finished the altimetry scan with the biome scan most of the way done, which is good enough for the moment. With the help of the biome data we've collected thus far, it's time to launch our third and final probe lander to the Mun. This time, even though it looked like I could get away with it, I circularized the craft's orbit before the maneuver. This ended up being a good idea since I overshot the maneuver while time warping. On the next go around, we do in fact conduct our transfer burn. Even though there was no signal during the maneuver, our trajectory is set to hit the Mun dead on. This means we can just adjust how close we're getting once we're further towards the Mun, rather than having to do a correction much earlier. Once we're coming into closest approach, I captured the spacecraft in orbit with a periapsis above 18 kilometers. It's not perfect, but we just need to be able to pass around the Mun so that we can start landing on the part of the Mun that is both facing Kerbin and in the sun, which is tricky since the Moon is in the waning crescent phase, as you might view it from the ground on Kerbin. While passing around the Mun, we ironically finished the Mun science contract by transmitting the site experiment from low space around the Mun, and not by collecting a complete set of scan data. When the time came to decide upon a landing site, I had a look at the biome map. I found some notable craters biomes that are in the sliver of the Mun we're interested in landing on, which were pretty close to the probe's existing trajectory. So I did a slight burn normal to move the trajectory northward over them. Once we get a bit closer, we can start the landing and discard the now empty transfer stage. While I was inspecting the spacecraft's path, I saw something that piqued my interest: a rare craters biome in the area we're set to fly over. Since we have a good opportunity to land in this difficult to find biome right now, we may as well take it. I started to burn in between the retrograde marker and the anti-normal marker to simultaneously slow the lander down and move its trajectory southward. Once we're close enough, it can help to stop looking only at the map and look at the world with our own eyes. You can actually see the craters here on the surface, including the one we're trying to land in. This rare crater biome is a crater inside of another crater. Once we're crossing into the rare craters biome, it's time to slow ourselves down. I ended up pitching the craft down towards the horizon to prioritize slowing down in the horizontal direction as opposed to the vertical. Once we're heading almost directly down, we can slowly drift down to the surface and touch the lander down the same way we've done with the other two. With that, we've gathered another bite of science and completed our robotic exploration of the Mun's surface. Back at the KSC, I'm not sure at this exact moment what sort of contracts we should do, but I figured the logical next administration strategy would be the Mun program. We'll be working the Mun in the same order as we worked Minmus, but it'll be rather more difficult, so you'll have to stay tuned to see how the Kerbals can engineer themselves out of this dilemma.